I've been Steven's lover for 3 years. He's handsome, rich, amazing in bed, and generous to me. His only rule for me was that I couldn't do kissing scenes. Because of this, I lost a few acting opportunities and was criticized by many as being pretentious. But I didn't care. I've always been someone who knows her place, never causing trouble for him. Until now. I never thought that the first time I caused trouble, it would be such a big deal. I ended up hitting his freshly returned first love. It all started when Steven asked me to accompany him to a banquet. I never fit into these high society circles and initially wanted to refuse. But we hadn't seen each other in 3 months because I'd been filming on location, and I really wanted to see him. So, I went. As expected, I ran into people I didn't want to see. I instinctively avoided them, but they never seemed to let me off the hook. I just wanted a breather in the garden, but Joanna and Catherine followed me there. Joanna grew up with Steven. A few years ago, her family immigrated for business reasons, but she had recently returned to the country. Catherine, on the other hand, is my mortal enemy, always buying smear campaigns and fake trending topics to attack me online. I never imagined the two of them actually knew each other. I sat on a bench, unwilling to move, while Catherine crossed her arms and began throwing veiled insults. Isn't today Thomas's engagement party? How did just anyone manage to get in? Joanna glanced at me with indifference. Didn't you drag me here to talk? That's all you've got? Catherine smiled obsequiously at her. Don't rush me. It's so stuffy inside, we just came out for some fresh air. We can chat as we walk. Joanna didn't say much and leaned casually against the fountain. Catherine, are you and Steven planning to get engaged? It's almost finalized. Fantastic. Such a perfect match. Certain people who don't know their place should really take the hint. Joanna stayed silent. Catherine kept going, but I had no interest in listening. I turned to leave, but her next words stopped me in my tracks. Some people aren't just embarrassing themselves, but come from families that are complete disasters. That engineering accident years ago, how many people lost their livelihoods because of it? Honestly, that project manager breaking a leg was karma. My steps faltered. Turning back, I slapped her across the face. Twice. Catherine held her cheek, glaring at me. Nancy, are you crazy? I sneered. Gossiping behind my back is one thing. But doing it right in front of me, did you really think I wouldn't dare hit you? Joanna frowned at me. Miss Nancy, this is Thomas's estate. Have you thought about the consequences of such behavior? My gaze turned cold. Miss Joanna, if your parents were insulted like this, would you calmly think about the consequences first? Joanna said nothing, but Catherine lunged at me, grabbing for my hair. We started fighting, and somehow, Joanna ended up joining in. By the time Steven arrived, the three of us were a tangled mess. Steven yanked me out of the chaos, his face dark with anger. I was utterly disheveled, while Joanna was in a much better state. I glared at Steven and asked coldly, "Are you going to side with her?" He frowned deeply, but said nothing. I pulled off the ring on my finger and threw it at his face. Remember this, it's me breaking up with you. Then I turned and stormed out of the banquet, hailing the first taxi I saw. But as soon as I got in, I couldn't hold back the tears. A crushing sense of grievance overwhelmed me. Just yesterday, I had wrapped up filming and rushed back to see him, full of anticipation. But not only did I barely exchange a few words with him, I was humiliated by others, and he stood by their side. My phone kept vibrating. It was Steven calling. I picked up and cut him off before he could speak. The house in Area A is under my name. Move out within a week. Then I hung up and blocked him everywhere. Trash. I'm done with him. I didn't return to the house in Area A. Instead, I checked into a random hotel. After a shower, as I calmed down, I began to realize something. I might be the first mistress in history bold enough to kick her benefactor out. I'm becoming braver around Steven. At the beginning, I was the timid one. The first time I met Steven was at a cocktail party. My agent had forced me to attend, trying to butter up big-name directors and investors. My family was well off initially, but my father's engineering project had gone wrong. Not only did he end up with a broken leg, but all of our savings were used to compensate the workers. We were drowning in debt, and my parents were stressed to the breaking point. I wanted to help, but I was scammed into signing a predatory contract. The agency provided no resources but forced me to attend drinking parties. I had no way to breach the contract, so I faked illness a few times to avoid it. Until that night, when I had no choice. When I pushed open the private room door, a group of middle-aged men was inside. Stephen stood out like a refreshing breeze, seated at the head of the table. As soon as I entered, he got up to leave. Panicking, I followed him out. "Sir, can I stay with you?" He looked down at me, towering over me. "Why? Do I seem like the easiest one to approach?" Among all of them, he looked like the hardest to approach. But I didn't dare say that. I shook my head earnestly. "You're the best looking." Stephen let out a short laugh. "I know." Sensing his impatience, I added, "You look the most decent." Amused, he raised an eyebrow. "Then you're mistaken." He turned and left, while my agent dragged me back into the room. Inside, I was forced to drink glass after glass of wine. It wasn't until a fat, greasy director reached for my thigh that I resisted, knocking over a wine glass in the process. He slapped me and called me ungrateful, then started tugging at my clothes. Desperate, I grabbed a shard of the broken wine glass and stabbed it into his leg. I thought I'd go to jail for sure. But then the door opened, and Stephen stood there. He swept his gaze across the room, silencing the screaming director. "Didn't you want to come with me? What are you waiting for?" I dropped the shard and ran into his arms, shaking so badly I couldn't stand. He carried me out. Stephen brought me to his home in Area A. That night, I had already showered, but I stayed holed up in the bathroom, too scared to come out. I heard him on the phone outside, handling the aftermath of the incident. When his voice stopped, I wrapped myself in a towel and stepped out. He was lounging on the couch, a few buttons of his white shirt undone, revealing a hint of his collarbone. I mustered my courage, dropped the towel, but couldn't look up. He stood, picked up the towel, and draped it back over me, smirking. "You're young, but you've got plenty of tricks." Blushing furiously, I stammered, I've never done this before, I don't know how it works." "Look at me." I clutched the towel tightly and forced myself to meet his gaze. His eyes were calm but carried a hint of amusement, both captivating and dangerous. "Do you trust me that much? Aren't you afraid I might be worse than the others?" Startled, I blurted out, "Good-looking people are always kind." He laughed, pulled me close, and kissed me. It was my first kiss, and my mind went completely blank. He gently brushed his thumb against my lips and whispered, "Go to sleep." "Can you sleep alone?" I nodded dizzily. That's your attitude toward people?" Sensing danger in his tone, I immediately hugged him. "I'm scared." "Sleep with me." Satisfied, he tucked me into bed before stepping out to make another phone call. When he returned half an hour later, he held me in his arms and slept beside me. Over the next few days, I obsessively checked the news but found no mention of the incident. A week later, my predatory contract was terminated. Stephen arranged for a new agency and manager for me, and the director who tried to assault me vanished from the industry. Over the next 3 years, Stephen gave me resources perfectly suited to my career. Step by step, I built a reputation, gradually growing more famous. My family's debts were paid off, and my parents opened a small shop back in our hometown. On the surface, everything seemed to be getting better. But I knew deep down it was getting worse. Because I was falling deeper and deeper for Stephen. He was supposed to be my sponsor, yet I couldn't help but see him as my lover. When did it start? I couldn't say. Loving Stephen was just too easy. The next morning, I woke up to find hundreds of missed calls on my phone, most of them from my agent, Paige. I had no idea what was going on and immediately called her back. Her booming voice completely shook off my sleepiness. "Oh my God, you finally answered. Do you have any idea what's happened?" "It's chaos." "What on earth did you do last night? What's going on?" Still groggy, I glanced at the trending topics while staying on the call. #Nancy and Catherine fight. #Nancy get out of showbiz. #Nancy quit the industry. Someone had recorded my argument with Catherine from last night. The video was edited to only show the few seconds where I suddenly lunged at her. I closed my eyes briefly and explained the whole situation to Paige, including my breakup with Steven. After all, I no longer had anyone powerful backing me. Paige was silent for a moment before sighing. Take a few days to rest. Don't look at the news. I'll figure something out. After hanging up, I watched the trending video carefully. The angle was unusually discreet, clearly premeditated. Even Joanna, who was standing next to us, had been cropped out, leaving only Catherine and me in the frame. The comments were filled with insults and accusations against me. Some even claimed I was merely a stand-in for Steven's true love. That's when I realized Catherine must have been stirring the pot again. But I wasn't fazed. If people want to curse me, so be it. This line of work comes with that. Just leave my family out of it. As for being a stand-in, that's utter nonsense. When I first started dating Steven, he treated me so well it made me uneasy. One time, after a dinner party, he came to pick me up. Emboldened by the alcohol, I asked him if I looked like someone he once knew. He pulled me into his arms and flicked my forehead lightly. Have you gotten too into your acting role? A stand-in? I'm not into that sort of thing. Pushing my luck, I asked if there was anyone else. He scoffed, do I look like I have that much free time? His answer reassured me for a long time. Maybe Steven didn't truly love me. Maybe he just found me novel, or maybe he simply didn't want the hassle of finding someone else. It didn't matter. At least while we were together, there was no third party. I can accept not being loved or chosen, but I refuse to lose my last shred of dignity. Because of the sudden negative news, one of my scheduled variety show appearances was cancelled. For now, I stayed holed up in my hotel, too afraid to go outside. The anti-fans scared me. 2 years ago, I played a psychotic villain, beautiful and unhinged. My portrayal was so spot on that netizens said it didn't even feel like acting. But I never imagined some people would blur the line between the character and me. When I had an injury that left me unable to walk properly, someone actually threw a beehive at me, trying to disfigure me. Thankfully, Steven arrived just in time. He set his custom suit on fire to drive the bees away. That high-end suit, worth tens of thousands, was completely ruined. I shook my head, annoyed that I was thinking about him again. I picked up my phone to check missed calls and messages. They were all from friends offering words of comfort and encouragement, none from Steven. Then it hit me, I had blocked him everywhere. Frustrated, I tossed my phone aside. If he really cared, he'd find a way to contact me. He's certainly capable of it. But the silence only shows he doesn't care. Sitting by the window, I felt conflicted and self-absorbed. I knew it was impossible, yet I still clung to a shred of hope. Deep down, I believed Steven must have liked me at least a little. On our first Christmas together, my schedule was too packed for me to return home, so I stayed in the A District apartment. Half asleep, I suddenly heard the door creak open. Startled, I jumped out of bed, grabbed a lamp, and cautiously opened the door. Steven stood at the entrance, snowflakes still clinging to his shoulders. He raised an eyebrow and smirked at the lamp in my hand. Is this how you greet me on Christmas? I dropped the lamp and leapt into his arms. I wanted to ask why he came, but it seemed like a question he wouldn't want to answer. So I changed my words. How come you always show up when I'm thinking about you? Carrying me toward the bedroom, he teased in a low voice, let me see where exactly you've been thinking about me. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the air was warm and steamy. When he came out of the shower, I was already half asleep. I vaguely felt him slip a red envelope under my pillow and press a kiss to my forehead. Nancy, Merry Christmas. Even without my parents that year, I didn't feel lonely. I stayed in the hotel for 3 days. I planned to step out to buy some essentials and get some air, but Paige's message stopped me in my tracks. The news about my fight with Catherine was still trending and had escalated further with new allegations. Wade, a director I had once stabbed in self-defense, came forward to accuse me of trying to seduce him for resources, only to move on to a wealthier backer afterward. He didn't name names but claimed he had been blacklisted and provided evidence that was a mix of truth and lies. Paige was at her wit's end. This wasn't something she could suppress on her own. Can't you just contact Steven and apologize? He could resolve this with a snap of his fingers, she urged. I stayed silent, feeling a sudden sting in my nose. In the past, baseless rumors like this would be quashed before they gained traction. But now, the flames were spreading uncontrollably. "He won't help me anymore," I said softly. "He's getting married. Cutting ties with me is exactly what he wanted." Paige sighed. "If we can't find a way to spin this positively, you might not get any work for a long time." "It's okay. I'll write a statement to clear things up. People can believe it or not. I don't want to waste energy trying to prove myself anymore. Thanks for sticking with me all these years. I've only dragged you down." Paige comforted me as best she could, but I knew the situation was grim. I checked the news. The hate comments overwhelmed the few voices defending me. I logged into my account and typed out a post. "Hi everyone, this is Nancy. I'm sorry for taking up public attention with my personal issues, but since things have blown up, I hope people can see the truth. First, I have no relationship with director Wade, nor did I ever attempt to seduce him. When I first entered the industry, I was naive and tricked into signing an exploitative contract. My agent forced me to attend drinking parties, and Wade tried to coerce me. Out of desperation, I used a glass shard to stab him in the leg in self-defense and barely escaped. After failing to take advantage of me, he targeted other newcomers. I don't know how many innocent girls fell victim, but I managed to save 2 of them. I'm not sharing this to seek sympathy, but to expose a predator. To the girls I helped, you don't have to speak up for me. This ugly matter isn't worth reopening. Second, please direct any malice at me alone and leave my family out of it. They've done nothing to anyone. If you can't control your words, I sincerely hope everything you say rebounds back to you. Finally, I am not a third party, nor have I ever been a stand-in. I'm now single. Thank you for reading." I drafted a brief statement and posted it before turning off my phone. Leaning against the windowsill, I stared blankly outside. I hadn't done anything strenuous, yet I felt utterly exhausted. Before I realized it, I had fallen asleep, and I dreamed. Back then, my career was just starting to take off. A movie Paige had landed for me exploded in popularity. Though I was only a supporting character, my role was extremely well received. Riding the wave of momentum, Paige secured me variety shows and commercials. One evening, during a business dinner with investors, I ran into an old acquaintance, director Wade. Only, he wasn't directing anymore, he had transitioned to producing and even changed his name. That night, as I was passing by his private room, a young woman stumbled out, her clothes disheveled. I immediately stepped in front of her, shielding her with my body while raising my phone to record him. She shakily told me there was another girl still inside. I brought them both out. Wade didn't dare touch me. He knew Steven was behind me, and Steven wasn't someone to mess with. I knew this might cause trouble for Steven, and if he chose not to intervene, I might be in serious hot water. But at the time, I couldn't think about any of that. If I hadn't come across the scene, there'd be nothing I could do. But since I did, I couldn't just turn a blind eye. It would haunt me for the rest of my life. The 2 girls eventually disappeared from the public eye. They both left the entertainment industry. Later, I told Steven about it, bracing for a lecture. But instead, he chuckled and said I was impulsive. He only warned me not to act alone in the future, as even a cornered dog would bite. I did feel scared in hindsight, but there was a part of me that didn't regret it. My inexplicable confidence always came from Steven. When I first started in the industry, I was a nobody, no fame, no status. Hardly anyone knew about my connection to Steven. On set, I was often bullied as a rookie. I didn't want trouble, so I kept my head down, thinking their words wouldn't kill me. But one day, Steven visited the set and overheard someone berating me. He called that crew member over and told me to yell back. At first, I hesitated, but he gave me a nudge, and I followed his lead, hurling every word back at them. The more I said, the more I felt liberated. By the end, Steven had to drag me away. That day, he smiled at me, his voice warm and teasing. "Are you planning to bottle up your anger until you develop a cyst? I can't be here every day. If anyone bullies you, you fight back. And if you can't fight back, you tell me. I've never let you suffer, don't you dare let anyone else make you." Steven was radiant that day, his brows sharp and eyes glimmering with light. It was in that moment my heart cracked open, spilling over with love. The memory dissipated as Paige's call jolted me awake. My face was damp, and I quickly wiped it dry before answering. Paige's voice was brimming with excitement. "Oh my God, my darling, do you even understand your relationship with Steven?" I was still groggy and confused. "Haven't you checked online? Go look right now." Steven personally clapped back at the haters. He was so cool. "If he proposes to you, promise me you'll say yes. I'm begging you." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me bewildered. When I opened the social media app, I was stunned. The trending topics had completely shifted. Hashtag Steven the sponsor. Hashtag Steven versus haters. Hashtag want Steven S comebacks. Hashtag Steven S unwavering love. And at the top of the comments under my statement was one from Steven. "You have time to write essays, but no time to take me off your block list? Break up? Nancy, well done." Reading his comment sent a chill down my spine. I could practically picture him gritting his teeth. I scrolled through the trending posts, realizing Steven had been going back and forth with haters, defeating them one by one. Hater, that woman flirts with every man she sees and even dared to block Steven. Steven, what? Jealous I didn't block you too? Hater, she's the one who seduced them and still claims she was forced. Look at her, she's not even pretty. Steven, come on, let me see what you look like first. Hater, even if she was forced, what about the rumors of her doing drugs and bullying her peers? Steven, I told her to do it. Any questions? Talk to me. Hater, Steven's just playing with her. No way he'd actually marry her. Steven, if I'm not marrying her, should I marry you? Hater, this account is too active. Is Nancy paying for bots now? Steven, XX building. Tell the receptionist your username. Let's talk in my office. I was dumbfounded. Just as I allowed myself a small smile, a new comment notification popped up. Open the door. I froze, tossed my phone aside, and peered through the peephole. Steven was standing outside. My heart pounded as I opened the door. Steven looked down at me, devastatingly handsome. I wanted to say something, but tears welled up and streamed down my face. I just stood there, teary-eyed, staring at him. He paused, then gently wiped my tears away, though his words were as sharp as ever. I haven't even said anything yet, and you're already crying? Playing the victim suits you well. He pulled me inside and sat on the sofa. I stole glances at him, my heart secretly delighted, though my words came out stubborn. Why are you here? He tossed his jacket aside and rolled up his sleeves. To talk about your biased accusations. His words reignited my anger. I scooted farther away and muttered, "You're the one being biased. What's there to talk about?" He sneered. Biased? Have I ever not taken your side? You were so absorbed in the fight that you didn't even notice Catherine's nails almost scratching your face. If I hadn't pulled you out, your face would have been ruined. You cry over a single pimple, imagine if your face got scratched. You'd flood the whole house with your tears. I was stunned. I hadn't expected that to be the reason. Feeling guilty, I still didn't want to admit it. Then why didn't you say so at the time? Steven scoffed again. Did I not say it, or did you just not listen? When I ran after you, you'd already vanished. You're never this eager when it comes to finding me. And you're the first person bold enough to kick your sponsor out. My confidence wavered, but I kept up the argument. You didn't come looking for me these past few days. When I was being attacked online, you ignored it. Weren't you busy arranging your marriage alliance? Why are you even here? I refuse to be anyone's mistress. Steven pulled me closer, gripping my chin as his gaze darkened. Who told you I'm getting married? Are my resources so bad, or were my gifts so cheap, that you think I'd trade my marriage for connections? They all said. You listen to them, you listen to everyone. Why won't you listen to me? I shrank back, freeing myself from his grasp. Then where have you been these past few days? He sighed. I was abroad on a business trip. A project collapsed, and I had to handle it. I didn't intervene at first, because I knew Catherine had cozied up to Director Wade. I waited for her to spill everything so we could take them down together. And these past few days, I had bodyguards stationed near your hotel in case any haters caused trouble. What else do you want to know? Ask everything at once. Finally, I asked the question buried deepest in my heart. Will you marry me? Or do you just want me to stay your mistress forever? Stephen fell silent. My heart sank. Then he said, why can't I have both? You can stay if you want. Leave if you don't. When have I ever stopped you? I lowered my gaze. But the couple's ring I picked, you've never worn it. Stephen reached into the left chest pocket of his jacket and pulled out 2 matching rings. They weren't from any luxury brand, just handmade by an elderly woman I'd come across during a film festival. Affordable, but unique. I'd fallen in love with them and bought them on impulse, wearing mine whenever we were together. But Stephen had never worn his. I didn't wear it because you didn't want to go public. This ring is too distinctive, so I've kept it in my pocket every day. He stood and walked toward me, his deep gaze locking onto mine. I wasn't sure if you wanted to get married, so I could only hint at it by taking you to an engagement party to see how you'd react. If you're still not ready, we can wait a couple more years. And yet, here you are, taking all your bad moods out on me. Aren't you polite to everyone else? Why is it that you have no manners and throw tantrums only at me? His voice grew lower and softer. When I looked up, I found myself meeting his deep, intense gaze, his eyes brimming with passionate tenderness. He pulled me into his arms and gently patted my back. Let's make up, baby. I hugged him back and softly murmured, okay. It was hard to describe what I felt at that moment, but it hit me how much I'd taken things for granted. Over the years, I'd been so spoiled by his love that my own possessiveness grew uncontrollably. The mere thought of him not being utterly devoted to me, even for a second, was unbearable. I admit it, I'd been taking his love for granted. The next morning, I received a text from Paige. Not only was my previous variety show back on track, but I'd also been offered several new commercial gigs. When Stephen and I returned to District A, we walked out hand in hand in plain view of everyone. In the past, I would have been more discreet, but now, there was no need. People snapped photos as we passed, but they were friendly about it, and Stephen didn't seem to mind. I thought yesterday's matter was behind us, but to my surprise. When we got home, Stephen's belongings were gone, clothes, watches, accessories, toiletries, everything. For a moment, I thought we'd been robbed. I even wondered why the thief only took his things and left mine untouched. Stephen gave me a teasing, half-smiling look. Didn't you tell me to move out within a week? How could I dare disobey? Who knows when my stuff might end up dumped on the street? After all, I don't pay rent, and my name's not on the deed. How could I possibly have the right to live in this mansion? Listening to his sarcastic tone, I wanted to bury myself in shame. He moved out because he thought I didn't want him back, and now this whole stunt was just to mess with me. Knowing I was in the wrong, I clung to his sleeve and coaxed him to move back in. By the afternoon, all his belongings were back in place. To make up for it, I even sorted his ties by color. Stephen headed to the office, while I stayed home reading materials for a new variety show. That's when I unexpectedly got a call from Joanna inviting me to dinner. Given the recent buzz surrounding me, Joanna personally came to District A to pick me up, which made me feel a little flattered. Stephen said you used to have stalkers among your aunties, so it's better to be cautious, she explained. Her sudden change in attitude puzzled me. What exactly was she up to? It wasn't until we sat down at the restaurant and she raised her glass for a toast that I understood. Nancy, I once believed some lies and misunderstood you. I caused you trouble and hurt you. I'd like to formally apologize today. I immediately realized that Catherine must have badmouthed me, leading Joanna to form a biased opinion of me. I'm not the kind of person to hold grudges, so I picked up my glass and clinked it with hers. Throughout the meal, I found Joanna to be surprisingly easy to get along with, straightforward, honest, and someone I clicked with. Curious, I asked her what made her change her mind. She said she'd been reading the online hate comments about me and noticed many were baseless, clearly orchestrated. She chuckled, particularly at those claiming Stephen saw me as her substitute. Joanna explained that she, Stephen, and Thomas grew up together, as their families were close. She and Stephen had always been just friends. Their parents had once hoped they'd marry, but Joanna, being career-focused and indifferent to romance, didn't care about marriage. She'd assumed Stephen felt the same. When she realized he didn't want to marry her, she immediately respected his decision. Recently, she visited Catherine on set and saw her throwing tantrums like a diva. Meanwhile, many crew members spoke up for me, describing me as kind and easy to work with. That's when Joanna began to suspect the truth was different from what she'd been told. Her words reminded me that kindness often brings kindness in return. After dinner, Joanna planned to call a designated driver, but we unexpectedly ran into Stephen, Thomas, and his younger brother, who had also just finished dinner. I apologized to Thomas for the fight at his engagement party. It was rather inappropriate of me. Thomas gave a curt nod, telling me not to dwell on it, and left after a brief exchange. Thomas's younger brother invited us to his bar, but his eyes were fixed on Joanna the entire time. Sensing the tension between the two, I loudly suggested, "Joanna's had a bit to drink. How about we get her a driver?" Thomas's brother immediately volunteered. "I'll take her." Ignoring their back and forth, I pulled Stephen away and left. On the way home, I asked Stephen, "Is there something going on between them?" He played with my hand and replied, "Can't you focus more on me? They'll work things out themselves. Don't meddle." I looked at him and teased, "Aren't you tired of me yet?" He froze for a moment, then raised the partition in the back seat and pulled me closer. In a dangerously playful tone, he asked, "Are you tired of me?" Wrapping my arms around his neck, I smiled sweetly. "Not at all. I could never get tired of you." He didn't say anything, just gave a casual smile. But that night in the bedroom, I cried and screamed nonstop. 3 days later, the PR team released a thorough clarification debunking all the false accusations against me, complete with concrete evidence for each point. Meanwhile, multiple scandals about Catherine came to light, being kept as a mistress, collusion with director Wade, and even her involvement in coercing young women into exploitative situations. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. Catherine's career was effectively over. I watched the full video of the fight and finally realized how Joanna got involved. Catherine had dragged her into it, and Joanna ended up shielding me from several slaps. Laughing, I texted Joanna an apology. Public opinion shifted, and those who had once criticized me began apologizing. But I wasn't particularly interested in the tides of online drama until I came across a photo. In the image, I was wearing a thin dress, suspended on wires for a scene, while Stephen stood nearby holding a down jacket, watching me with a gentle expression. The photo was slightly blurry, clearly taken some time ago. The caption read, "Turns out Stephen has been head over heels for Nancy since 2 years ago." Looking at the picture, I immediately remembered it was from my first year in the industry. It was freezing, and I had to wear that flimsy dress for outdoor shots, with a wind machine blowing for added effect. After a few days of filming, I came down with a fever. In a daze, I called Stephen, and he showed up that very night. The next day, I had no scenes to shoot, so he stayed at the hotel and took care of me all day. When I felt a bit better, I had to return to the set for more outdoor scenes. As a rookie, I didn't want to delay the schedule. Stephen didn't say much, but stayed by my side, holding that down jacket. After every take, he'd wrap me up in it, along with himself. He stayed for 3 days until my scenes were complete before leaving. That winter was bitterly cold, but all I remember is the warmth of his embrace. Smiling at the photo, I quietly saved it. The news buzz gradually faded, as if everything had settled down. Work continued as usual, and my most recent assignment was participating in a popular outdoor variety show. As I was getting my makeup done backstage, the fire alarm suddenly blared. Smoke began to spread, and chaos erupted around me. Amid the pushing and shoving, someone grabbed me and pulled me into a small storage room. It was Catherine. She wore a hoodie with the hood up. Her face looked haggard, and there was a bruise at the corner of her mouth. I discreetly observed her. She wasn't holding anything, it seemed like she just wanted to talk. "You must be feeling pretty proud of yourself, right? Opportunities, fame, love, you have it all." She blocked the door, forcing me to stay. I found a box to lean on, keeping some distance between us. "There's nothing to feel proud of," I said calmly. "Work and life, they're just like that." Catherine looked at me and suddenly burst into laughter. But as she laughed, tears began to fall. "You probably don't remember me," she said. "We were in the same group sent to entertain those men that night. But Stephen chose you, and I was left behind in that room forever. Sometimes I wonder, if Stephen had picked me instead, would everything be different? Do you know how much I envied you? Why is it that you get everything while I had to endure all this? Why? All I wanted was to earn some money for my brother's medical bills. For a moment, I was dazed. I really didn't remember Catherine. There were several girls in the private room that night, but I hadn't had the chance to see them clearly. I looked at her. How's your brother? She lifted her head, wiping her tears with a trembling hand. He's dead. He died of his illness, before I could make it big. I looked out the window and sighed. I was luckier than you, I admitted. If I hadn't met Stephen, I probably wouldn't have done as well as you. I might not have made it to where I am now. But one thing I can say for sure, even if I were trapped in the same pit, unable to save myself, I would never drag others down with me. Catherine fell silent. Perhaps she was thinking of the girls she had lured, who were trapped forever in those small rooms. You don't get it, she said after a while. If I hadn't done it, I'd have been discarded long ago, left to rot in some corner no one even knows about. I didn't respond. Quietly, I moved closer to the door. Catherine noticed, but didn't stop me. I opened the door and heard her sigh softly. People's lives are just different, she said. I paused, turned back to look at her. She tossed an envelope onto the ground at my feet. The wind from the window swept through her long hair. Her eyes were red, but she wore a defiant smile. I really hate you, Nancy, she said. But you're also the only one who will help me. See? Sometimes, the world is just that absurd. I don't regret anything, and I won't repent. All I want is for those beasts to die. With that, she stepped onto a box and jumped out the window. I was stunned, frozen in place, until someone pulled me into a warm embrace. I didn't know why I was crying, but tears streamed down my face. Catherine's final act. Catherine was dead. The envelope she left me contained a long list of names. It documented most of the people involved in these shady dealings over the years, everything from exploitative contracts to forced companionship. It was an entire industrial chain. I reported it to the police and made the list public, signing Catherine's name at the bottom. The incident drew widespread attention and heavy scrutiny from all corners of society. The police promptly launched an investigation, and every individual involved was held accountable. Many people mourned Catherine, though there were others who remained critical. I stopped following the developments. I had never experienced her pain and couldn't condone her actions. But I hoped the girls locked in those small rooms could finally be free. Life goes on. Life and work continued as usual. 6 months later, I won the Best Actress award. What I didn't expect was that the person presenting the award would be Stephen. The moment he appeared, the audience erupted into cheers. He handed me the trophy, his gaze warm and filled with pride. Congratulations, Miss Nancy. I wish you a brilliant career ahead, he said. Another wave of applause and cheers followed. I accepted the trophy, feeling a lump in my throat. It took me a few moments to compose myself before delivering my acceptance speech. When I walked off the stage with another actor, he instinctively reached out to help me. But Stephen shot him a glance, and he immediately withdrew his hand, wide-eyed, before hastily walking away. Amused, I walked over to Stephen and left with him. Why did you scare him like that? I asked, chuckling. Stephen put his arm around me as we walked. Did I scare him? I just noticed his hands were really pale. I rolled my eyes at him. Back at my seat, I snuck a glance at the trending topics online. As expected, the comments were already exploding. The actor's reaction of pulling back his hand had been turned into a GIF, spreading like wildfire. Observant fans had also noticed that my ring wasn't from any brand sponsor, and speculation about Stephen proposing had gone rampant. The truth? We were already married. One morning last week, I woke up to find a new ring on my finger, not the pair we had bought before. Why didn't you use the ones we bought before? At least they were unique, I had teased. As he adjusted his watch, he said, "This one's unique too." Don't like it? I actually loved it, but I teased him anyway. If I don't, can I exchange it? He chuckled, pinched my waist, and said, "If you grow 10 more fingers, I'll put rings on all of them." The next day, we got our marriage certificate. After the ceremony. The awards ceremony ended, and Stephen draped his coat over my shoulders, smiling warmly. Let's go home, my wife. Epilogue, from the male lead's perspective. The little kitten's temper has grown lately, she bares her teeth more often. Still, it's better than before when she was overly cautious, always afraid of causing trouble for me. Now, she feels more alive. The only downside is that she gets too into her roles, filling her head with melodramatic nonsense, like being someone's replacement. I guess I'll have to keep her away from scripts like that. After 3 months apart, I finally came back, only to have Thomas's younger brother drag me into a heart-to-heart talk. What a bother. He can't even manage a proper "I love you, Joanna." It's been over 20 years, and he still can't get the words out. No wonder his brother's married while he's still single. I thought leaking the news of their arranged marriage might help him, but I nearly got myself into trouble instead. The little kitten was so angry, she threw her ring at me and ran off. By the time I picked up the ring and chased after her, she was already gone. The one call she answered was to tell me to move out. At least she still had the energy to kick me out instead of quietly sulking. I wanted to go after her, but an overseas project ran into issues, and I had to leave immediately. Before boarding, I told my assistant to keep an eye on her. He's not completely useless, he arranged security for her the moment bad press broke out. I watched the full video and did some digging on Catherine. Knowing she had a backup plan, I didn't intervene immediately. I could imagine my little kitten crying alone in her hotel room. It's a tough situation. By the time I stabilized things, days had passed. I flew back to find her fanbase struggling to fight back against the hate. It's ridiculous, I might have to open classes for her fans on how to deal with haters. When I finally saw her, her eyes were swollen from crying. She'd cried more in these 3 years combined than ever before. I held back the urge to comfort her right away. If we didn't clear this up, she'd brood over it forever. We had to sort everything out, one issue at a time. Watching her argue with me, her stubbornness mixed with love, I found her both adorable and exasperating. She listens to everyone but me. The temper I've spoiled her into having is now entirely directed at me. But at least I managed to calm her down. My little kitten is cutest when she smiles. The end.